Good evening. I am Dr. Fuad Halim, and I thank the Federation of United Doctors for inviting me to share with you some of my thoughts on virus human engagement from an evolutionary perspective. Viruses are definitely very old, and if we take humans in a different context, then humans are also very, very old. Maybe the human form of the Homo sapien in the animal kingdom might have been a relatively recent event in the evolutionary time scale, but the processes that human beings use and the conserved genetic elements that humans have and other organisms which humans share with indicate very clearly that the legacy of all life on earth definitely is very, very old. And because it is old, it is essential to understand that there are deep relationships between various species that come about and express themselves at various times, and COVID crisis, COVID pandemic is one such situation where we find this very interesting relationship between a virus and a human being expressed. Now, at the very primary, one has to understand that viruses do not eat anything, they do not excrete anything, they do not breathe in or breathe out, they do not have any respiratory process. So basically, the virus is an organism which does not have any internal metabolism. Secondly, the only criteria that a virus fulfills that brings it close to something living is that it reproduces. Now that creates an interesting challenge, because any organism that does not take in anything, how does it replicate its genetic structure without acquiring any environmental, what you call, food material or resources? So this challenge is clearly indicating that a very, very old relationship between human beings and viruses exists. In fact, if we look at viruses in the animal kingdom, the three broad all living things, whether they are eukarya, prokarya or fungi, viruses have the potential of actually invading any of these primitive lines from which all life at present represents itself. So, in the search for the last universal cellular ancestor, LUCA, the idea of LUCA is to find that cell from which everything on earth is actually evolved from. While that search is going on, the challenge that a virus actually puts forward is that viruses have an existence outside the cell, but it has to come back to the cell to reproduce. And this coming back to the cell with viruses, with prions, with virions, and other similar elements which are classified after being clubbed together as mobile genetic elements. These mobile genetic elements, they have an extracellular existence away from the organism in which they reproduce, and then they come back to the organism to reproduce. So this brings about a very interesting relationship, and this has been going on since ages and has been impacting various organisms and also human beings too. So the virus, it uses the human cellular genetic structure to reproduce itself. Now this relationship was not established for COVID-19 just on the 31st of December, because all other viruses are also using the same mechanism to reproduce themselves. And This relationship is an evolutionary relationship that is coming down since time immemorial. And its basic tenet lies in the fact that everything that is alive today on the planet is built up of the 5 basic nucleic acids, that is arginine, guanine, cytosine, uracil and thiamine. In various combinations, these 5 basic nucleic acids, they represent everything that is alive on this planet, whether it be plants, whether it be fungi, whether it be animals, whether it be fish, anything on this planet, whether it is marine life or terrestrial life, are built out of these 5 basic nucleic acids, including viruses and human beings. So the potential and the possibility of the virus actually getting the human cell to reproduce itself is born from this reality that the virus also is built up of these 5 basic nucleic acids, and human cells and genetic structure is also built out of these 5 basic nucleic acids. Hence, this relationship allowing the virus to actually come into the human cell and get the human cell to reproduce itself is a relationship that is born out of the fact when life expressed itself on our planet 3.5 to 4.5 billion years ago. And when life expressed itself, it used these basic building blocks to form the myriad of variations that life expresses itself when we see our planet in its fullness, in its greenness, in its living, what you call differences and variations. So this interesting relationship, I will limit now to the virus and the human being. We already know that the human genome is 5 to 8% viral origin. That means as we developed as human beings, we evolved as human beings, we engaged with viruses, and viruses left their genetic material in our germline, and we then passed on our germline to the next generation, and this added itself, and at this point of time, we as human beings, our human genetic structure contains 5 to 8% of material that actually originated from viruses. We already know the negative side effects. We know that viral oncogenes that are there, when a virus infects us, those oncogenes or the complementary part that is there within our genetic code, when it gets exposure to this virus, it actually precipitates the possibility of oncogenesis, the formation of cancers. Now, the virus itself, on one hand, has contributed to the human component of the viral oncogene, which now lies within our germline, and we transmit it to our next future generations. We also know the potential advantage of having hepatitis G. We do not know why hepatitis G is present in a subpopulation of the humans. But we do know that if the hepatitis G virus is present, the HIV virus and its what you call potential of precipitating a severe clinical condition is reduced. So an HIV virus, its potentiality of creating severe disease is countered by the presence of a hepatitis G virus, which we find in a subpopulation of human beings. We are not very clear as to why this hepatitis G virus is there within the human subpopulation and what are its other effects. But we do know in context to HIV, it has a positive role to play, and it does play a positive role. On the other hand, If we look at the potentiality of the cholera vibrio, which when it gets infected by a bacteriophage, it causes the severe toxic form of cholera, the seasonal variation, when the tide in the Gangetic basin, especially in the Sundarban areas during the monsoons, this balance is disrupted, then the cholera vibrio becomes much more virulent. So there is direct impact of viruses on human beings. The hepatitis G virus is creating a positive effect in context to HIV infection. On the other hand, the bacteriophage which affects the cholera vibrio increases its potential to create toxicity in human beings, is an indirect impact of virus and humans per se. If we look at a more concrete event which took place about 300 million years ago, about 300 million years ago, the monotremes existed. You had mammals, but mammals were not giving birth to live children. Mammals were laying eggs, the monotreme stage of evolution. And the remnants of the monotremes are there, still found in Australia and New Zealand. You got the platypus, you got the arachnida, so and another two species are there. These species, they still lay eggs, but they suckle the young, they produce milk. So the monotremes got converted to mammals which gave birth to live children. This transfer took place about 300 million years ago when a particular HIV-like virus infected the monotreme lineage. And this particular immunocompromising virus allowed for the mother's immunity to be reduced at the layer of the placenta. Now that viral component which actually allowed that the mother's immunity does not cross over the placenta and go into the child to destroy it, which has foreign protein components coming from the father. This viral, what you call infection, or this viral inclusion was vital for the monotremes who were egg laying to become mammals that were actually giving birth to live children. And that residual effect is still there present with us. So this entire interaction between virus, mammals and present day human beings is something which needs to be understood from an evolutionary perspective to have a long-term overview as to how organisms engage with themselves and how they actually have the potential of creating negative effects as well as positive effects. The sheer volume of viruses that we have is humongous. In fact, the number of viruses that we have studied at this point of time is minuscule compared to the number of viruses and the varieties that are there. 10 to the power 5 into 10 to the power 30 is the number of viruses that are present in just the ocean. It is said that if you make these electron microscopic visible particles stand in a single line, the number of viruses on the surface of the earth and the ocean would create a line that would be so long that it would take 10 million light years to cover. That is the humongous number of viruses that we have. And these viruses also are present on the human body. We have understood a lot about the bacteria on our body, and we know that as the microbiome. Now we are still to study the effects of the virobiome, that is the viral micro environment that actually covers our entire body externally and internally, and how helpful they are to us. We have just scratched the surface of understanding that an individual, the number of cells that he has inherited from his biological parents is far outnumbered by the number of cells that bacteria and other organisms by their sheer presence on the human body, give the opportunity of life to express itself. We are just scratching the surface of understanding how these bacteria not only help in digestion, where major work has been done, but also how these bacteria help a person to develop all his faculties, including his personality. Expanding on the microbiome concept, we also now are beginning to understand that the body has a number of viruses on it, and these viruses somewhere or the other play a role. As I earlier mentioned, the role of hepatitis G has become very evident in context to HIV. The other viruses, how many are present, what variety is present, and why they are present on the human being is something that we need future studies to explore and develop upon. In the context of COVID-19, we do know that the COVID-19 virus as yet does not infect the germ line, that is the ovaries and the testicular tissue that are important to transfer genetic material to the next generation. So we can safely assume that at this point of time, COVID-19 is a virus that is not going to leave behind any legacy beyond the generation that is going to be affected or infected. But studies still need to be done. We still have to conclusively close that question as to whether COVID-19 has the potential of going into the next generation or not. The discussion of trying to understand how human beings relate to these mobile genetic elements who leave the body and spend a small period of time outside the body, but to complete their life cycle, they have to again re-enter the human cell to regenerate themselves. These mobile genetic elements, whether they be viruses, prions or virons or other such, this entire class of organisms, what is their niche in the evolutionary scale is something that we have not concluded as yet. But it is an open area where serious work needs to be done to understand how life originated on the planet and how those relationships which have allowed COVID-19 to evolve over the 3.5 billion years to become COVID-19, walking a different path, and human beings originating from the same situation, walking a different path, have evolved to become the species that we are today. Despite walking these two different paths, our basic connectivity remains, which is why COVID-19 can enter and use the human cell and the genetic apparatus to reproduce itself. It's a very interesting area of work, and evolutionary medicine, the latest wing that is adding itself to medicine globally, it is still at its infancy, but something that we need to understand is the future of understanding how pathogenesis, what are pathogens, who is a patient, and on an evolutionary scale, how different organisms impact each other positively by creating a healthy microbiome, without which the human form of life cannot exist. And when this gets disrupted, an unhealthy relationship evolves and pathogenesis takes place and is expressed in the form of disease. I invite all of you to please look into the future, as medicine is going to add to its various specialities its newer speciality called evolutionary medicine. I once again thank the Federation of United Doctors for giving this opportunity to me to speak about the evolutionary relationship between viruses and human beings, and for this brief opportunity, I thank all the viewers who have been with me. Have a good night and see you in the future programs of this platform, Federation of United Doctors.